Amazing.
Welcome back, everyone. Episode 8 or 9, I think, of Just Conversations. Solution-focused communication with the goal or intent of informing systemic change. And as always, my next guest needs no introduction. Over to you, Jioji.
Hi, Nissan Bulavanaka, and good day, everyone. My name is Jioji Ravulo. I am Professor and Chair of Social Work and Policy Studies in the Sydney School of Education and Social Work at the University of Sydney. And I'm joining yourselves from the unceded lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. My research and areas of practice revolve around young people and their involvement in the criminal justice system. So trying to understand why young people get involved in the criminal justice system, including police and the children's court and youth justice, but also looking at how do we create better policing practices, court practices, youth justice practices to better help young people involved with them.
Yeah, wow, thank you. Just around improving systems and how we can improve outcomes for youth and definitely overrepresentations. And thank you for acknowledging the lands that we're both on. I'm just down the road, oddly enough. They're not ceded, in the violent ways that they were taken. So thanks for that. Straight into it. Where are your greatest frictions? Sorry, that's my phone. I thought that was on silent.
Oh, good.
Okay.
No problems.
Where are you finding the most friction around trying to get change, and what's what's causing you the greatest concern, or where do you find the greatest hope as a solution?
So I'll answer that question across a couple of different responses. The greatest friction, I believe, is the lack of shared understanding and responsibility across our social structures, systems, and services to respond to the social and welfare needs of young people who are involved in the criminal justice system. So traditionally, we use, especially in Western societies, especially in places like New South Wales, the rational choice theory approach to crime, where you had a level of rationality and you chose to commit that crime. Subsequently, you do the time. But with that approach, you diminish the understanding as to the contexts and the different reasons why people may have led to their involvement with that particular behavior or that particular crime because of certain situations and circumstances that surround them. And what we know from the research is that a large proportion of young people involved in the criminal justice system have significant social and welfare needs. And those things include things like a lack of engagement, sustainable engagement with their local schools. So that's stuff around the education system. A lack of engagement with their health literacies, so an understanding of their health needs and how to access services. That's to do with the health system. A lack of understanding associated with their engagement with police and or problematic policing approaches that are more focused on punitive interactions with certain peoples and population groups. So that's to do with the legal system. And then a lack of suitable accommodation arrangements and or infrastructure in their local communities, like, for example, access to local transport, like public transport, to help them with their ability to move in and around their own communities. And that's to do with welfare systems. So you can hear already that I'm talking about those four key systems. So you've got the education, the health, the legal, and the welfare systems that have its accompanying structures and services that we need to be more mindful of and creating critical conversations around to support young people involved in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Sorry, big answer. Sorry, I just went on for a bit. But
it's right on the money, because what I always say to people is, one, you can't legislate desperate behavior. Like, it's impossible. Most of the people that I know that are incarcerated have behaved desperately. Pretty much everyone has behaved desperately to get into prison, like as an incarceration. Like they're not just, there's organized crime, obviously, but they're not sort of setting
Sure.
out like it's like I'm doing this because I need to survive, or I'm doing this because of, these sorts of, as well as one of the other things I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to do is work for an Aboriginal community controlled organization, and culture as a protective factor. So solutions to that and getting, and so what can we learn and take away from, so working in systems, cultural systems that are thousands of years old, what can we learn to improve and implement easily enough to our current approaches that you've just spoken about that are not quite adequate and up to scratch?
So one of the key theories, but even practice approaches around, again, the justice system is around understanding the welfare approach associated with justice. So instead of doing the punitive approach, which generally focuses on, again, on the criminal behavior and the criminal behavior alone. So, there is this notion that within the punitive approach, or the way that we punish people for their behaviors, you just focus on the crime, but you don't focus on anything else, right? But there's the limitations, because then you fail to understand what's happening in the background for people. Whereas the welfare approach to crime is about understanding that bigger picture. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because within Indigenous First Nations perspectives, both here locally in Australia, but also in the Pacific where I'm Indigenous. So my father's Itoke Fijian, Indigenous Fijian. That's where my indigeneity comes from. In a lot of Indigenous cultures, Vanaka and Bula, thank you. In a lot of our First Nations cultures, both locally, regionally, and globally, it revolves around the collective, about this idea that we are all part of each other. Like there's a shared reciprocity,
community.
that my individual well-being is your that's right, community. It's the collective, right? So the reason why I mention that is because that's what we need to be doing more in Western and white settings.
Yes.
In Western society, we're obsessed with the individual and the individual responsibility. Oh, there we go. There you go. There's some fireworks in the background. Well, I'm not celebrating that per se, but we are acknowledging. So I don't know why that did that, but acknowledging that in Western society we do celebrate the individual, but we fail to then understand the way in which we then are part of a broader collective, and the way in which we should be responsible for each other in the context of that shared responsibility.
And so that's what one of the things that I've always spruiked is the punitive model that we have, and it's all through society, schools, everywhere. Like I had a child that was essentially suspended out of school just because the suspensions got so long. But in that punitive model, as the need of the individual increases, so too do the onerous conditions to access adequate help and support.
That's right.
Yeah, so
that's
like the greater I need things,
that's right,
the more I'm pissing people off. So the more people don't really want to deal with me, and the harder it is for me to access that help and support. Whereas if we had a community background, it's a bit different.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's a great summary, and that's actually what I had alluded to when I did my doctorate many years ago. I talked about this concept that I think I do need to unpack and actually write more about this. But you're hearing it this first in regards to this podcast interview. A concept that I coined, 8-ball marginalization. So 8-ball marginalization. This idea that people who are already marginalized are always behind the 8-ball, but are constantly behind the 8-ball because of their ongoing interactions with system structures and services that perpetuate their marginalization. Exactly what you just said there. So if you already have problems and it's treated punitively, then it just snowballs. Like you just constantly then are in a cycle of marginalization. That's right. And you're always then behind the 8-ball.
Yeah, I like that. I think we have, like, obviously we have a lot of alignment around the way that we think and all that sort of stuff, but I really like hearing it in a different vernacular from you and a different approach. So yeah, thank you. Because I'm not an academic. I have lived experience of the criminal justice system, and I've fortunately enough, I've published works and all that sort of stuff and done a fellowship and traveled the world and sort of on the back of that, I'll just talk about. So there's a big thing around lived experience and trauma-informed practice at the moment. But I've just come back from the Netherlands about 12 months ago. And what I discovered there was they have a humane approach. So I went there because I was like, oh, you've closed all these prisons. I want to understand your policy around that. And they're like, we don't have a policy around closing prisons. We're not trying to close prisons. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Why did you do that? Well, about 10-ish years ago, we decided to treat people humanely. So we just had a humane approach over and above a punitive approach. And I think that thing of that one up, one down of like a trauma. So if I say trauma-informed practice, that I'm better than the other person that's been traumatized in some sort of level of one up, one down relationship. Yeah. Because you're traumatized and I feel like
in the sense of, yep.
Yeah, if you're being traumatized, I can
Yes.
help you sort of negate that or whatever. Whereas if I bring a humane approach, we're both humans. So it doesn't create that one up, one down slight relationship. Yeah. So together, if I come in humanely and treat you humanely over and above trauma.
Yes.
So how can I treat and introduce humane practices into trauma to reduce instances of trauma? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I like that. So a lot of you, right, a lot of the movement in human and social services has been around trauma-informed practice. And I think definitely it does play a great platform in regards to people understanding that there is trauma behind the way in which people may
drives the behavior
present. Yeah, but I agree with you. I agree that this needs to be grounded in that humane approach where the commonality, as you've just inferred, is our humanity. That irrespective of the different experiences that we've had, we are still part of together, like this community, this collectiveness. And I think that's why, again, going back to this First Nation context of viewing the world, or, you know, making sense of the world, the development of knowledge and practice of knowledge. So, you know, key terms like epistemology and ontology. I always try and say those words so it makes me feel and sound smart. But those concepts really are around how we make sense of the world, right? And it's exactly what you're saying. If we have more of a humane, collectivist, communal approach to viewing and interacting with the world, happy days. That's worth fireworks in the background.
Yes, worth fireworks in the background. And that's sort of mainly because prison is a traumatic experience. My experience, so most of my trauma comes from me being in prison. Like I wasn't traumatized as a child. I sort of fell into drug addiction, responsible, you know, totally responsible for all of the stuff that happened to what I did and all that sort of stuff. However, my trauma comes like from the violence that I witnessed while incarcerated. So how can we, you know, and I don't honestly believe we can trauma inform when working in those correctional settings, but it can never be a trauma informed environment. Like you can't heal and make someone well while you're punishing them. It's a bit of
this is the thing. I completely agree with you. No, I completely agree with you. And my background's actually also in alcohol and other drug usage and also with mental health. So that's the key areas that I work in as well, apart from youth. And it's interesting, in Australia, when you do a social work degree, you got to do 1,000 hours of placement. And when I did my social work degree, I did my last...
Sorry, I did say that.
Well, this is the thing, right? So I did my first placement at a youth justice centre out at Campbelltown, Reeby. So that was formative in me understanding about youth crime. Then my second placement was at Centrelink, so I understood stuff around again federal social security systems. But then my final placement, which then led to a job offer, was at Long Bay Jail. With Narra, which was a pre-release program for people with alcohol and...
That's where I got released from.
There you go. So I'm glad I mentioned that because I did a 6-month stint at Narra as one of the counsellors there. I was the AOD counsellor.
I did a 6-month stint as well.
And there you go. So a lot of... twins. No.
Yeah.
So I would connect my understanding of a lot of the stuff that I have now in regards to the youth justice system, the adult corrections system, but even alcohol and other drug usage, right? Because my work, because you've seen the program, you've gone through the program.
Yeah.
One of the key things that I took away from that experience at Long Bay Jail was exactly what you just said. The levels of trauma were already situating people within those settings, but the social context for usage, again, the idea that people generally will utilize substances because there is some form of context associated with that substance use. And I still do counseling work myself still to this day. So I work with the National Rugby League. I work with NRL players,
Yeah, nice.
especially around their substance use and mental health.
Yeah.
And again, it's this line around what is the context associated with these things. So this is just drawing back to the point that you were raising before. If we have a punitive approach to things like health as well, like alcohol and drug usage, and we punish people for having problematic usage, it just continues to perpetuate a cycle of disadvantage and labels those things as crime as opposed to a health matter.
As well as, and so I done a graduate certificate in Gestalt therapy, so I have a qualification there. But so in that's a reaching out mechanism as a survival coping strategy. So when we're punishing people for surviving and coping, like what does that compound around? Like how does that like integrate? You're worthless, you're hopeless because what you're doing to cope, we're going to punish that, and it's bad. It's like, oh, so I'm a bad person, am I? How does that reconcile if we keep taking those practices and approaches?
Exactly, Dean. Love everything that you've just said. Completely agree with everything that you just said.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff is also reflected in the concept of labeling theory, the idea that people then utilize those particular labels. Yeah, that's it, right? This idea of the context, we then provide them with a particular parameter in which they exist and behave, and then people will self-internalize those particular labels as part of their identity and their interactions with self and others.
Totally, because so I wrote an employment pathways program for corrective services, and part of that, so it was a job readiness program for guys getting out. And what I would talk to them about is like, you're going to get out, and if you put on the night tracksuit and you put on the TNs, like you're putting that label, like other people are going to judge you on that, and they shouldn't. Let's not say that they should. However, but if you live up to that label, like you're perpetuating it. So when you get out, maybe don't put on the night tracksuit, don't put on the TNs. Like if you don't want to be labeled that way, and how can you get out from under that label by wearing different clothes and carrying yourself differently, and you labeling and taking that power of the label? Because for me, what's happened is I got out in 2001, and to get out from under that stigma of being a criminal, having, like I say to people, we don't have criminogenic needs. We're human, and we have an inherent need to be treated humanely. So that whole, like I consistently argue with people like Garner and like criminologists, is like, stop labeling us and saying we have criminogenic needs. We don't have criminogenic needs. That's a construct that you have created. How?
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And like, I understand there needs to be titles for concepts and to understand and to access help and support in the greater world. But for me to get outside from it, so I was out for about 12 years before the criminal conviction started to impact me, mainly because I work for a family, my family. Let me know when, just put your finger up when we need to pause, if we need to pause, okay?
Okay, no problems.
Yeah, so just around understanding and that concept of the significance of being labeled, and how, like, I'm lucky because, I was white and privileged. So I was functioning at a level before, like somewhat better than most when I went into custody. Yeah. However, how can we treat, like we put people in a cage, we poke them with a stick, then we let them go and expect them to just function up at some level and participate in society.
Look, I agree with you, Dean. No, I agree with you. And I think you're right. Like when we do talk about things like criminogenic factors, which are, again, trying to understand the variables that led to criminal behavior. But a lot of this, you're right, a lot of the criminogenic stuff generally revolves around desistance and this idea of people desisting. So if we desist with a particular behavior, or we understand it from a risk point of view. So that's the other thing that happens a lot in our legal systems and structures. It's always a bit about risk management and being risk adverse, right? And so you're completely right. Like people then, the way in which we then facilitate the services associated with corrections or youth justice is around us trying to decrease you being risky
Yeah.
as opposed to you being a functional member of society in the context of your strengths, your capabilities, what you can offer in the context of, again, the collective.
I've tried to have conversations with corrections around this. Is like, instead of, so obviously you're going to get released, you're a risk. If you think I'm that risky, don't release me. Like that's like, and going through the release of prison is a traumatic experience. You go from a violent community that where violence is the solution into a community where violence is like, going to get you quickly back there. Over and above,
Yes.
that conversation of when you're getting released is, okay, what skills do you have? How are you going to contribute to
Yes.
the community you're going to go back to? And how can we help you to utilize those skills in the community you're being released to? Over and above, we're really scared and worried you're going to get out and you're a really risk to everybody and yourself.
That's right. That's right. So you're perpetuating that cycle of labeling, but also that marginality as well.
Yeah.
That you're constantly behind the eight ball by virtue of your engagement with those systems, those structures, those services.
Yeah. And
completely agree with you.
time. So introducing instances of joy with the intent of increasing hope.
Yes.
Talk to that if you
Oh,
can.
that's really interesting. Yeah, so I alluded to that in my last answer around strengths and capabilities.
Yeah.
So one of the key things that we bring to, I think, the conversation, if we are focusing on the collective, on the communal, is what are the capabilities, what are the possibilities that individuals can bring to the community, to the conversation. And so a lot of my work in youth justice has been looking at notions of hope, this idea that people have these strengths that can contribute to solutions. So it's this notion of the solution focused approach, but it's also this idea that people, when they are tapping into their strengths, can create pathways of agency and self-determination. So it's really about giving them an internal understanding. I'll give you an example. So a lot of my conversations with young people have been around this idea of what they're capable of doing. And when I start to talk to them about their interest areas and about particular skills that they have in their interest areas, they're generally quite surprised about how those skills can be translated into workplaces, into vocational outcomes, into courses for learning, for potential educational pathways. And they're always surprised. And it's about those intentional conversations, right? The other one that I get always surprised by is when I ask people to nominate their support people, because again, I really want them to know that they're part of a community, that they are loved, that they are, part of something. And I always do this activity where I ask them to actually name people and sort of, count them on our fingers. And originally, when they start this reflection with me, they just sort of go, oh, I don't really have many support people. But when we start to actually name them and I start to actually visually show them on my own hands how many people they've just listed, they're like, oh my goodness, I actually have quite a few support people around me. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. And I think that unlocks this idea that that's one of your strengths is your support people and the people that you can lean into and with as part of your journey. So I think that then provokes joy that leads to hope.
Yeah. And so the other thing part of what I was getting at there is one of the assessment tools that I use when working with people that have been incarcerated is, what do you do for fun?
Oh, yes, what we do fun. Sorry. All good.
Okay. So introducing instances of joy. I think we just touched on that around the mechanism and measurement that I have around asking people what
Yes.
they do for fun, because a lot of people that are coming out of trauma and traumatic experiences,
Mm.
they don't know how to have fun, or they don't identify what fun is.
Mm.
Not that they don't know how to. So that's more
Mm.
a direct question that I would be looking at to implement in a mechanism of measurement when you're assessing people being released. That would increase instance of
I
hope.
like that.
Oh, I like surfing. Oh, I'm looking forward to going
Love
surfing.
that.
Creates hope, yeah.
Yeah, love that. Love that.
Or I
So
like going to
it's
watch the
interesting.
footy. I'm looking forward to going and watch the footy.
Love that. So love all that. And I agree with you. One of the things that I did as part of the case management model that I helped develop was 13 life domains. So it was helping people to map certain goals and aspirations across 13 different domains. That ranged from things like accommodation to health needs to understanding your family. But one of the other key areas that we looked at as part of the 13 life domains was recreation and this idea of what you may engage with socially.
Yeah, yeah.
We also looked at stuff like ethnic culture as well. So we really did as part of that approach. I agree with you. We do need to intentionally ask people to tap into what brings them a sense of connection and joy
Look at the
as
trauma
part of their
brain.
well-being. I agree.
If you look at the trauma brain, they're just in survival mode all the time. So they just really, most people that are undergoing trauma they can't get out from under it. So it's around having clear, direct, informed conversations about that. On that, what do you do for fun? And how do you
Yes.
model
What do
that?
I do?
Because I believe seriously in modeling the behavior that we expect. So how do you, like, just,
Yes.
obviously you're Fijian, they're fun people, not to be culturally
Yeah.
insensitive, but I have
Ah.
Fijian friends. I've been to Fiji about 19 times. I got married there, the whole bit. Anyway, love it. Love it.
Yes. Yes.
That
Great.
smile is infectious. However, what
Yes.
do you do for fun, and how do you implement joy in your life? How do you fill your
So
cup?
what I do for fun, what I do for fun is I love going out and hanging out with mates, just downtime. A lot of my work, I do a lot of serious sort of stuff for
Yeah,
my work
mate.
with research and teaching and counseling. So I just love downtime with mates, music, movies, that sort of stuff, family. I love reading. I've refound the joy of reading for leisure as opposed for work, because I do a lot of reading for work as part of my role. Yeah, because I'm always writing, so I need to read. So reading for leisure has been fun, but I also enjoy travel. I love travel, Dean. So very fortunate to travel both domestically and internationally, both for leisure and work as well. So I love the whole experience, the cultural experience, even locally, going and hanging out in places in Australia, hanging out with First Nations communities across the country as well. But doing similar, like overseas, when I go to different countries, I love to check out what's happening with their First Nations and or Indigenous communities, along with other ethnically diverse communities as well. So that's what brings me joy and continues to fill my cup.
Yeah, nice. That's one of the things I feel like we've got so much overlap. It's sort of a bit weird, but I love meeting people from different cultures and different backgrounds. And like, this is the first time we've met, really, in essence. So yeah, it's a bit sort of,
Yes.
but yeah, I love meeting people from different cultures and different backgrounds. And that's sort of my thing in sort of my consulting work is unlocking the value of difference. How do we understand the value of difference and unlock that? Because a lot of people don't really like different stuff. It's confronting, it's unfamiliar. So how do we unlock that?
Well, that's my whole jam as well, Dean. Like my whole life
Stop
revolves
it.
around diversity and its differences. No,
Yeah.
really, really.
Yeah.
I have a motto that I say, and one of the mottos is, how will you make your how will you use your difference to make a difference? And for me, that includes not just your ethnic diversity, but this is, class, gender, sexuality, religion, your
Exactly.
lived experience. How does that all play out as part of your ability to make a difference? So that's what I love about the work that you're doing, Dean. You know your areas of diversity and difference, and you're using that to make a difference.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Time being the most valued commodity we have. So thank you again. Jioji, anything that you would like to say before we go? Anything you'd like to spruik, your book, the whole bit, whatever it is? You got a minute.
Yeah, so we've got different activities that I'm involved in at the moment. We've got this book that just came out recently on youth crime, on children's court and youth justice. So check out that particular book that's been headed up by Garner Clancy and Rowan Lanham. I've got a chapter in that. So check that book out. I'm also involved in a new handbook called the Handbook of Critical Whiteness that, again, really tries to understand some of those perspectives from a dominant culture point of view, and how do we transcend and ensure that diversity and its differences are part of our society and part of our shared conversations as a collective community.
Fantastic. Thank you again for your time. I'm sure our paths are going to cross again. I look forward to the day that happens. So yeah, safe travels and be well.
Likewise. Thanks, Dean.